My presentation will be on the emperor penguin. Here's the taxonomic classification for the emperor penguin. We can see the phylogeny looks very similar down to aves, and then it goes into the penguin order and family, and then the genus species is Epidotes fosteri. Also, these are neonasts. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, even though they're flightless. So penguins start evolving at the end of the Cretaceous near New Zealand. They evolved from seabirds and are very closely related to the albatross, petrels, and gulls. There are currently 18 species of penguins alive now, but there were 47 that have gone extinct. The first encounter with penguins with the European world was on Magellan's first circumnavigation of the world, where a crew member described them as strange geese near the Falkland Islands. The largest species of penguin today is the emperor, at averaging about 4 feet tall. The smallest are the little blue penguins. Those are just over a foot. And then there were much more massive penguins alive that have now gone extinct. And I didn't know this, but some of them were very large, like these two, averaging at like 5 and 6 feet. And the biggest they estimate to be about 350 pounds. So as we know, penguins have lost the ability to fly. But if we think about that a little bit differently, penguins have really evolved to fly in a different medium, aka to swim. So like birds that fly through the air that have hollow bones, the penguin's bones have evolved to become more solid. So this helps them counteract their body being buoyant and allows them to dive better. Their body is also very streamlined. The elbow and the wrist are for the most part fused, so they don't have a whole lot of movement in their flippers, which helps them swim faster and more efficiently. As well as they also have their knees inside of their body, which can help reduce drag, as well as helps anchor the feet better to make a flipper. They're camouflaged very well when they're swimming, so if you think about it, a predator that's swimming above them is going to see the black on their back, and that's going to blend in well with the ocean floor and the darkness below. Whereas a predator looking up at them is going to see their white belly and the sky or the light around that. So their bodies are very well camouflaged to help them survive when they're swimming, because a lot of their predators are in the ocean and not so much on land. They have a gland near their tail that secretes oil that they spread on their body, which helps aid to waterproof them. And they also have really great vision underwater. So their eyes have evolved to see more blue light instead of red light, because blue light is more easily able to penetrate water at a depth. And I didn't know that there was a term for this, but when they lay on their stomach and pedal their feet, I think a lot of us have seen the penguins do that, but I didn't know there was a term for that, but they call it tobogganing. It's just easier for them to walk. Well, they can't really walk, but they waddle. They aren't evolved to escape predators on land, whereas they do in water. So that's why the evolutionary pressures have given them more of those traits. So penguins only live in the southern hemisphere. There are a group of Galapagos penguins that get really close to the equator, but none of them go into the northern hemisphere at all. They're mainly found in Antarctica, South America at the tip near like Argentina and Chile, as well as a little bit further up the coast, as well as New Zealand, Australia, and Africa. They can spend half of their life in the water, and they just eat a lot of food, and the swimming takes a lot of energy, so a lot of their time is spent in the water. They're very adept divers. Some dives can be 20 minutes long, and while most of the dives are between about 300 and 600 feet at a time, which is still astounding, there have been scientists that have tracked the penguins with GPS, and they found that they can go 1,800 feet deep, which is crazy. As I said before, specifically with Antarctica, there's no land-based predators. So they're really going to watch out for sharks, seals, and other larger animals that could eat them in the ocean. They also live in large colonies on land. They're called rookeries or wattles on land, while a group of penguins in the ocean is called a raft. So I found this fact really cool, that penguins can actually drink salt water to stay hydrated. They actually have a suborbital gland that releases salt right underneath their eye, and it pulls it out from the bloodstream and releases it in like a fluid. So obviously super beneficial when you're in the ocean, or if you're on a place where there is no snow, because lots of penguins outside of Antarctica don't have snow around them year-round. They eat a wide range of fish and sea life, like just general fish or even squid. They have no teeth, but they have fleshy spines in their beak. And this is mainly just so once they have something in their mouth, it helps it go one way down their esophagus rather than if it slips out. Some interesting mating practices are that the males will gift females different rocks and pebbles to help them build a nest. Females also prefer the fattest males, and this is because when the female has the chick, the male will actually incubate the chick, and they can incubate it for 2 months while the female goes to the ocean to feed, and they want the male with the highest fat reserves so that when she gets back that she knows her egg is going to be safe. Penguins, for the most part, are monogamous, and they can actually recognize their partner's distinct calls on mating grounds, which is actually very helpful when you have thousands of identical looking penguins. And then once the female returns from her feeding, then they take turns with the egg until it's hatched. And then they both have a fairly equal part in parenting. They will both feed the young. They often regurgitate their food up until the penguin is able to go out on their own for food. So now I'll introduce my study. So this was a study done in 2022, and it set out to examine fossil and genomic evidence to basically just get a clearer picture of what we think the history of penguins is. So they looked at fossils, different bones to identify species groupings, paleobiogeographical analysis, which is basically like when we look back in time, what areas were near each other, what currents were there, and what fossils have we found where, that we can gather enough evidence to say that these birds were species and then they split, etc. And they also use genetic analysis, specifically BioGeoBears, which is basically a probability model of the genome saying, how much do they have in common and how likely that these two species are related. So the paper was obviously much more in depth than I will go into summarizing it, but they made really nice visuals that I'm using here. So this is the late Cretaceous, early Pleistocene, and you can see in the lower left of the map there's a star where New Zealand is, and obviously representing a three-dimensional globe on a two-dimensional surface, we gotta think about how that connects, whereas New Zealand is very close to Australia. So it's just, we would have to fold it and then, represent it in 3D, and then they'd be very close. So New Zealand, they believe, was the ancestral home of penguins, and they eventually went to Antarctica because it was just very close by, and right away there at the late Pleistocene, or in the middle of it, there were about 6 different species that lived in New Zealand and Antarctica, and this was obviously a little bit warmer than what it is nowadays. So then in the Eocene, we see them speciate in Antarctica more, so now there's more different species that are living in Antarctica, as well as there's some species that are moving into South America and evolving into different species as well. But then in the Oligocene, Antarctica cools too quickly, causing almost all of the species to go extinct there. And then, as we can see, New Zealand is finally moved over to the other side of the map where it might be easier to wrap our brains around. But the penguins will take refuge in New Zealand. There's strong currents that flow around there, so scientists think that some penguin must have used those to find warmer weather in New Zealand. Then here in the Neocene and the Miocene, the penguins start to recolonize South America. And the scientists think that they used a circumpolar current, which goes around Antarctica, or the pole, or the South Pole. And then they begin to diversify a little bit more into some more modern penguins. And especially in the Pleistocene, they'll survive and speciate even further back into Antarctica again, and then as well as Africa for the first time. And sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but there are no penguins living in Madagascar, so sorry to disappoint. And then here there's two visuals that kind of showcase what I was talking about in depth more with all the species. So the first one on the left shows at the bottom over the geologic time and the breakup of the continents, and then basically what species they have found fossils at different places. You can see they color code with the continents all the way up to modern day. And the graph on the right is more or less the same thing. They still use the same color codes and everything, but they more try to get to how they're related and how they branch out to what we now know as the modern 18 species of penguins. So I thought that was really useful and helpful. Feel free to pause it and look at this yourselves. I looked at it quite a long time and thought it was pretty cool. Here my works cited. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned some fun facts about penguins.